Welcome to part 2 of this maze game tutorial for Android. Last time we made the cell class which holds the walls and created a two-dimensional array of cell objects for the whole maze. Today I'm going to show you how to draw the maze. First we need some variables. Float variables for the cell size and the margins around the maze. Private float, cell size, horizontal margin and vertical margin. And we also need a paint object which will contain the color and thickness of the lines representing the walls. Private paint, import that. Wall paint. Now let's initialize this variable in the constructor. Wall paint equals new paint. Wall paint dot set color, color dot black, and wall paint set stroke width. Let's also make a variable for this. So private static final float wall thickness equals 4. And copy that and paste it. Since we put the maze creation in a separate method, we have to call it create maze. Now let's go to the onDraw method. First let's get the size of the canvas. Int width equals get width and int height equals get height. Now we know how many pixels we have to work with. The next step is to calculate the cell size based on the canvas size. Let me explain you how I'm going to do that. I want the cells to be squares and the margins to be at least half the cell size. We have to distinguish two different scenarios. In the first one, the width of the canvas divided by its height is greater than the number of columns divided by the rows. In this case, the cell size is equal to the height of the canvas divided by the rows plus 1. The plus 1 is here because the margins here and here are half the cell size each. So the two of them together are like an additional row. In the other scenario, the width of the canvas divided by its height is less than the number of columns divided by the number of rows. In this case, the cell size is the width of the canvas divided by the number of columns plus 1. Now that we know how to calculate the cell size, let's put the code in our onDraw method. If the width divided by the height is less than the columns divided by the rows, the cell size equals the width divided by the number of columns plus 1. Else the cell size equals the height divided by the number of rows plus 1. Next we can calculate the margins. The horizontal margin equals the width of the canvas minus the width of the maze, which is the number of columns multiplied by the cell size, and the whole thing divided by 2, because we have two margins, two horizontal margins, that is. And the vertical margin equals the height minus the number of rows times the cell size divided by 2. Now we are ready to draw the walls. For this, I'm gonna go through the two-dimensional array again, so we can copy these nested for loops and reuse them. For each cell in the maze, we have to check all 4 walls. So if there is a top wall, we can draw it. Canvas.drawLine. Now this needs 5 arguments. The starting x and y, the ending x and y, and a paint object. So the starting x is x times the cell size plus the horizontal margin. But instead of adding the margin every time, we can use the translate method. Canvas.translate horizontal margin, vertical margin, which will do something like this. It takes the original origin, moves it a certain amount in the x direction and a certain amount in the y direction. In our case, these amounts are the horizontal margin in the x direction and the vertical margin in the y direction. Back to the drawing. Y times cell size x plus 1 times cell size y times cell size and wall paint. This was for the top wall. Let's copy that and paste it 4 times, or rather 3 times, for all 4 walls. The left wall goes from x and y to x and y plus 1. The bottom wall goes from x, y plus 1 to x plus 1, y plus 1. And finally, the right wall goes from x plus 1, y to x plus 1, y plus 1. I think this should work. Excellent. Now let's try to change the number of columns and rows. 14 columns and 5 rows. 14 columns, 5 rows, as expected. I think that's enough for this video, so I hope to see you soon in part 3.